Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Are Scotland going to get out of their pool at the World Cup? That's the question that I'm kind of framing this video around, but it basically gives me a bit of an excuse to talk about a few different things involving Scotland. Gregor Townsend with a new contract and the World Cup squad, preliminary World Cup training squad that he named just a few days ago. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in this video. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the fact that Townsend is staying on for at least an extra couple of years, what you make of his World Cup training squad, and do you think Scotland have what it takes to get out of their group at the World Cup in France? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel as well, and let's get into it. I'm going to start off by talking about the World Cup training squad. That's the most recent of the news that I kind of mentioned in that little intro. So this is a 41-player squad from Gregor Townsend. Similarly with the Welsh squad, when I did a video on that, I'm not going to run through every single name because a lot of you, by the time you see this video, would have seen the squad already, but I'll put it up on screen there just so you can kind of see the names that Townsend has gone for, and I'll run through a few of the headlines in just a moment or two. So 41 players in the squad. That squad will be trimmed down to 33. So similarly to all the other nations, they have an extended training squad. The really interesting thing about a World Cup, I always think, is the amount of time that the coaches get with the players at international level. It's pretty much the only time, or it is the only time really, in a 4-year period where the players will be in camp for a good couple of months before they kick off the World Cup. So it's almost the best prepared we see these international teams, which for me always makes things quite interesting. And what we have to consider in the build-up to the World Cup is what coaches are going to relish that time the most. It's great for all of them, but what are the sides that are potentially going to benefit the most from having that really extended time in camp? So as I say, 41 players for now. That's going to be trimmed down to 33. In terms of the headlines, I think, and I'll actually get onto this in a moment, there's not really too many shocks or kind of big headlines, bits of news that come out of Gregor Townsend's squad, which in itself I think paints a bit of a picture of where Scotland are at the moment. But Rory Darge and Darcy Graham both returned from injury. They missed the Six Nations, so are two obvious candidates to come back in. In particular, Darcy Graham. I thought Kyle Steyn actually on the wing for Scotland in the Six Nations did a pretty good job, but I think Darcy Graham was absolutely excellent last year for the Scots. Will most likely, if he's fit, come back into a starting wing position. Him and Duhan van der Merwe is just a really nice balance of different threats in terms of on each wing. So they come back in. There's only two uncapped players in the squad. That's Cameron Henderson from Leicester and then the centre, Stafford McDowell. In terms of the players who miss out, do drop a comment down below if I've missed anyone. I don't think there are any kind of glaring omissions or shocks with this team. Rory Hutchinson and then the hooker Johnny Matthews possibly are a few that I've seen mentioned in a few articles that I've read. But overall, as I said already, I think this is a Scotland team which is pretty settled. I think this squad, in fact, squad selection for the most part, I think is always quite a good reflection of where a team currently is. And I don't think there are that many question marks over Scotland, really. I think we know where they are. We know what sort of side they are. The question really is if they're going to be able to maybe kick on in the couple of months prep they have before the World Cup and get out of their pool at the World Cup. Because as I'll come on to in a minute, they've got an absolute stinker of a pool to try and get out of. But in terms of where Scotland are at the moment, they're solid, they're steady, they're kind of the best of the rest within the Six Nations. They're not as good as France and Ireland, but they were much better than Wales, England and Italy. So that's kind of where Scotland are. I will point out Cameron Henderson. Now, I haven't seen a huge amount of him. I'm naturally drawn towards him as a name because I've seen more of him in terms of being in England and watching more of the Gallagher Premiership. But I covered Leicester's match against Gloucester in Gloucester, it must have been 6 weeks ago, something like that, a couple of months ago. And he was really impressive, I thought. I was quite impressed. He was a kind of guy, I think he came off the bench, but immediately kind of had an impact. Young guy in the second row. I feel like the Scotland second rows are pretty steady at the moment in terms of Gilchrist and Ritchie and who you expect to start in those positions. But could Cameron Henderson come into it, maybe be a bit of a bolter, a guy that comes in and makes a good impact? That's certainly one from my point of view. And in terms of what I've seen and his style of play, might be just one for Scotland fans to keep an eye on. But any other bits and pieces to do with the squad, there will be a lot of you watching this who have watched a hell of a lot more of the URC than me, who are probably a little bit more in tune with players' form and things like that. What do you make of that squad? As I've said already a number of times, to me, it's a reflection of where Scotland are. There's no huge question marks over the team. We kind of know who is best in each position, and I think the squad kind of reflects that, really. What I will say as well, and you could probably say this for a lot of the teams, in particular Ireland as well, but Finn Russell's key, isn't he, at 10? I look at the 10s probably and think that if Finn Russell was to pick up an injury or something, I know there's Hastings, and the other name escapes me off the top of my head. There's guys in there, but is there anyone who can really come in and fill the void of Finn Russell? Probably not at the moment. But overall, I think Scotland will be pretty content with where they are at this moment in time. And the question in the title of the video, the question I posed at the start of my intro, are Scotland going to be able to get out of their pool at the World Cup? Now, this is something that we'll get a better idea on when we get nearer to the tournament and once they've played their warm-up games, because Scotland have warm-up games against France, Italy and Georgia at Murrayfield, and then they've got one more against France in St Etienne, before the World Cup kicks off. And as I've said already, their group is a really difficult one. South Africa and Ireland both in there, Tonga and Romania as well. They kick off the campaign against South Africa, so it's not even like Gregor Townsend and those coaches are going to have an opportunity to try and build their way into the tournament. After Scotland's opening couple of matches, we might have quite a good idea of whether they're going to make it through or not. It's a really tough fixture list. It's a really tough pool for the Scots. And honestly, at this moment in time, without obviously having seen the Springboks play yet, I just worry for Scotland in terms of whether they'll be able to get out of that pool. I'm really interested to see how things develop, particularly in those warm-up games. I'm going to try and keep a keen eye on it and look at things and think, what are we seeing that suggests that Scotland could get out of it? Now, obviously, we've seen Scotland push the best teams in the world really, really well over the last few years. They should have got the job done against the All Blacks in the autumn. They played okay against South Africa, but lost it. We've seen them push France and Ireland as well, but they've never quite been able to get over the hurdle of beating one of those sides who are at this moment in time above them. Are they going to be able to do that in time for the World Cup? Look, we love a shock at a World Cup. You never know what is going to happen, but I struggle to see where it's coming from at the moment. But let's wait and see. The final thing I did want to mention in this video is Gregor Townsend and the Scotland head coach, who I think we would all agree has done an excellent job with Scotland during his tenure as head coach. I did a video previously on the channel because it's been really up in arms of would Townsend stay on after the World Cup? Wouldn't he? The Scottish Rugby Union and Townsend himself have been pretty public in the fact that they weren't sure. They were looking at their options. But last week it was announced that Townsend has signed a contract extension, so that will keep him in the role until basically in between World Cups, which I think in itself is quite interesting. It goes up until 2026. Normally you see a coach sign on for the full 4-year cycle. I suppose what you would say would it means that actually if we get past this World Cup and a couple of years past the World Cup and things haven't really improved, the Scotland team maybe hasn't kicked on, then it gives them an opportunity to get someone in still with enough time to build towards the next World Cup. That's probably the positive slant on it. The more negative slant is it almost suggests they don't fully back him to get all the way through those 4 years. They're not quite certain at this moment in time. And I think from the fact that actually both parties, particularly the SRU, were quite public about the fact that they were considering their options, I wonder whether they weren't sure if they wanted to keep Townsend, but they simply couldn't find a better option. I wonder whether they're sticking with what they've got because they weren't enamoured with the choices they had out there. And I know that I think Scott Robertson started putting his coaching team together for when he takes over at the All Blacks, and some pretty high-profile coaches in the URC were maybe linked with the Scotland job and now going to be assistant coaches at the All Black. I just wonder whether their options got whittled away so they stick with Townsend. And as I said already, I think Townsend has done a great job. Don't confuse me on that. I think he's done a brilliant job with Scotland. I've consistently said that. I just wonder whether it had kind of reached its natural conclusion of him being their coach at the end of this World Cup. That's probably my only fear, that they start to slide a little bit following the World Cup. But I don't know, as I say, who comes in? Who would come in? I'm not sure who the options necessarily were. I'm not sure that they were too happy with the options they had in front of them. So that's my general thoughts on it. Again, you can always have your say in the comments down below. Also, just a reminder, like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. That's always hugely appreciated. I'm trying to start building up to the World Cup. I know it's going to be pretty manic once we get there, but it is nice to, even at this moment in time, without the conclusion of the domestic seasons, to still be able to have a little look ahead to the World Cup. Will Scotland get out of their pool? We'll wait and see. I'll see you in the next one.